Hi, it's Uncle Larry. Today I want to talk about whether human beings have free will, which is to say, you have the capacity or ability to choose between different possible courses of action unimpeded, to make decisions or perform actions independently of any prior event determining what you are about to do. That's what free will is. So, to repeat, free will is the capacity or ability to choose between different possible courses of action unimpeded to make decisions or perform actions independently of any prior event determining what you're about to do. Now, I'm going to say up front that I believe free will does exist, but many do not, including many neuroscientists. Neuroscientists are scientists who study how the brain and the nervous system work, if you didn't know. Many of them go as far as to say free will is an illusion. If you think you have free will, you're fooling yourself. In addition, many involved in the field of artificial intelligence, or AI, are very optimistic about the prospect of AI to actually replicate almost all human capacities, pointing to rapid advancement in machine learning, neural networks, and computational neuroscience as evidence. I find it spooky and frankly unrealistic. As if a computational neural system could fall in love. Come on. Human beings do that. Hey, what do I know? I'm just a humble basement philosopher and former DJ on the internet. Look, free will is such a complex subject, it would be easy to go down one side road after another. But for purposes of a brief video essay like this, I want to focus narrowly on what free will is and how it functions. But to do that, I'm going to offer a synopsis of just a very few number of people whose perspectives I happen to embrace. Most important is philosopher Peter Hacker. He and Australian neuroscientist Max Bennett have written extensively about the relationship between the brain and human capacities like free will. So I'm going to draw heavily from their observations. Philosopher James Cusson also offers an approach to free will that I will include at the end. I kind of like it. First, let's go back to the objections to free will expressed by many neuroscientists. Peter Hacker says a widespread mistake in cognitive neuroscience is to attribute to the brain properties that can be sensibly attributed only to living human beings as a whole. There is a tendency to attribute human-like properties, like free will, simply to the brain. Well, that's wrong. A brain is a part of a human being, not the whole human being. Neuroscientist Max Bennett says that it's a misuse of language to attribute our capacities like free will, intention, remembering, perceiving, etc., just to the brain. Rather, it is the person whose brain it is that possesses these attributes. And of course the brain is necessary for us to express these abilities, but we already know that. And it is misguided to attribute properties of entire wholes to just their parts. If this seems a little confusing, Professor Hacker offered some worthwhile analogies that might help here. So let me offer you three of them. 1, aeroplanes fly, but their engines cannot be said to fly. Aeroplane engines don't rev up by themselves and take off. Of course a plane couldn't fly without the engines, but the engines themselves don't fly. 2, an antique clock on the dresser keeps time, but their pulleys and wheels cannot be said to keep time. You don't look at a pulley or a wheel and decide what time it is. You look at the whole clock to find out the time. 3, the horsepower of your car isn't in the cylinders and pistons underneath the hood. If you lift the hood, you're not going to find, oh, there's the horsepower. Nevertheless, the car has horsepower. Of course, the car wouldn't have the horsepower it does except for the cylinders and pistons in the engine. But we say the whole car has horsepower, not its parts. Okay? I think these analogies are enough for now. Point is, you can't point to the brain or the rest of your body to locate something like free will. Free will is a capacity that whole human beings have. What we need to do is to stop thinking of free will as a kind of thing that you locate. Let me say that again. What we need to do is stop thinking of free will as a kind of thing that you locate and think of it as some kind of capacity that whole human beings possess. Capacities aren't in the brain or in anything. Remember what Hacker said, airplane engines don't fly, whole airplanes fly. Free will is a capacity inherent to whole human beings, characterized by the ability to choose between alternatives and to execute intentions. This capacity transcends a physical location. It's like a hockey team that has team spirit. You can't locate it, but you know it's there. Now, Here's another important dimension to free will. The whole notion of being answerable for something you did, or being held responsible for something you did, rests on the idea that you can act freely. When you decide to do something, when you form the intention to do something, and then you do it, it is assumed that you're acting freely. Similarly, you could have formed the intention to do something, but then changed your mind and refrained from actually doing something. Well, refraining from doing something that you intended to do is also an indication of acting freely. Actions have consequences for which you can be held responsible. And the reason for that rests on the assumption that you can act freely. You're not just a robot or a combination of firing neurons. You can't just say to a judge, sorry, I didn't intend to commit that crime, but my neurons just misfired. If you're answerable for your behavior, then it is assumed that you must be acting freely. Okay. At this point, you might be inclined to ask, well, does this mean that the brain has nothing to do with our actions? And of course not. I haven't done much of a job. If that's what you think, it's ridiculous. We already know certain parts of the brain are causally connected to certain facets of our activity. There is no reason to dispute this. We couldn't do what we do if the brain weren't functioning normally. But it isn't brains that fall in love. Whole human beings do that. It isn't the brain that prefers country music to hip-hop. Whole human beings acting freely do that. Now, why is it that so many neuroscientists and some philosophers believe free will is an illusion? Well, this goes to the nature of what we think is free voluntary action. And according to opponents of free will, what you take to be voluntary action is in fact determined ahead of time, preceded by a vast series of decisions in your brain that you simply aren't aware of. Advocates of this kind of determinism often cite scientific findings from neuroscience suggesting that neural activity associated with decision-making occurs before you're consciously even aware of making a choice. This leads to the conclusion that prior decisions are made at a subconscious level based on prior neural activity rather than through something that you're conscious of. Now, I don't want to be glib about this approach. I'm not a specialist on the brain. Views like this are seriously held, so I want to be respectful. But I just can't go there. You'll never get me to believe that every voluntary movement of mine is preceded by a vast series of prior decisions in my brain that I'm not aware of. I can move my hand, scratch my head freely, voluntarily. I'm speaking to you voluntarily at this very moment, but I do not believe my speech is preceded by hundreds of acts of unconscious neural activity. Now, I have a few more things to comment on. One is artificial intelligence, or AI. Again, I claim no expertise on this either. The question of whether AI could ever replicate wholly human capacities, including free will and various cognitive abilities, is a subject of ongoing debate and speculation among experts. Proponents say AI's potential to emulate or even surpass all of the capacities of human beings is on the horizon. Others, like moi, argue that certain aspects of human cognition, such as creativity, emotional intelligence, moral reasoning, and free action, will remain beyond the reach of artificial systems. We're just too complex, but that's just my opinion. At the end of the day, you may or may not agree with the way I have defended the human capacity for free will. If you can't bring yourself to believe in free will, here's an approach that might have some merit. This comes from philosopher James Cusson. If you can't adjudicate the truth or untruth of free will, you just can't get there yet, perhaps acting as if it exists will cause you to order your life differently than if you believe everything is determined by the brain or other external forces. You could argue this approach is a more empowering mindset. It's not unlike a religious commitment you might accept by faith. Acting as if free will exists is an attitude that can change the way you live in the world. You end up ordering your life, your behavior, your commitments differently in light of that provisional belief, whether or not it is true in some literal sense. Acting as if you are free also means you accept that you have a moral responsibility for the decisions that you make. Something to think about. Finally, my reference to religion now reminds me that in theology, the concept of free will is closely connected with the existence of the soul, so some of my other Christian friends will be disappointed that I did not spend some time on that. but I'm looking at the clock. Please accept my apologies. This essay has gone far longer than I intended. As a matter of fact, I suspect few will have even watched this all the way through. If you did, would you do me a favor and just put that in the comment? You don't even have to respond to the content. Just say I watched it all the way through. I want to know if there's interest in this. I put a lot of work into this particular essay. Give me your perspective, too, on free will. Does it exist? Is it an illusion? You let me know now.